conflict is just inevitable
Yeah.
and it's like a part of it's just a part of society. And I feel like I've seen more harm and more detriment done to the idea of avoiding conflict, avoiding even the possibility that you may have been in the wrong.
All right, let's jump in. Today we are talking with Jamie Theophilos, who is a doctoral student and associate instructor at the Media School at Indiana University in Bloomington. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Hi.
You are Hannah, Selena, and Natalie's immediate first choice to talk with when we landed on our season theme of Polarity. Your work and research about how media technologies impact social movements is of deep interest to all of us.
Hi, Jamie. We're so excited to talk to you today, especially having been in your class before and having had you as an instructor. I wanted to start off hearing a little bit about how you got here as an artist and as an educator.
Yeah. I would say what that really sought me to desire getting a PhD or pursuing a PhD and becoming an educator was just from how influential my teachers have been. Really life-changing. I feel like my teachers just really changed who I was as a person and were incredibly inspiring. And it just shows that the power of how positive a force a teacher can be in someone's life. So I think that was really my primary reason, is just feeling like how much the support and the intellect and the ways that professors challenged me, or not just professors, even high school teachers challenged me, that really pushed me to be a better person. And I found that to be incredibly appealing and something that felt really valuable. And definitely still is valuable to this day. I mean, there's professors at Indiana University that I still feel, specifically at the media school, that I'm so impressed and in awe with, that have impacted me, my advisors, or other professors that I've worked with.
And I'm wondering, because I know you went to school in Chicago for a while and IU, and then you worked at UNC, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, the difference in not only environments, but the polarity that varied from school to school and the differences in opinions. Did that at all impact your own perspectives on things?
That's a good question. I would say not as much. And I would honestly say that IU has impacted my experience more than anywhere else. And I can get to that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a variety of reasons, right? One is that the cultural climate in which I was teaching at these different places is quite different than it is now. And on top of that is certain things that are happening within Indiana legislation, such as the SCA 202 bill, which has sparked a lot of fear and distrust for faculty and people who are teaching as to how you engage with professors and students. I think that there is what is different than at time periods before is also this large kind of push and rhetoric around, in educational systems, the professor who's shoving your ideas down your throat. Mm-hmm. And I think something that has made me scared in a way that I haven't before is how, because of my positioning as someone who's not a cisgender man, it becomes inherently politicized, that itself gets read as a political positioning, in which makes me fearful that I will be chastised or be positioned as someone who's shoving someone down their throat because of just purely who I am. Pronouns are so politicized right now. And to the point that even coming on this show, I even have moments I don't want people to call me they, them, even though I've been using it since I was 17, because I don't know, is the people in this room judging me and already rolling their eyes at oh, this is ridiculous, this, all of that. I think that I'm not the only one who feels that, and especially at IU. And I do think this is something that's pervasive to the U.S., but I do think IU is particularly because of the SEA 202 bill.
And Jamie, do you mind just saying what the 202 bill is?
Yeah. And you please also, add if you have anything. But the SEA 202 bill is a bill that got passed in the spring that is based around the kind of pushing that you need to teach both sides of an argument, but not only that you cannot speak about something political that's not relevant to your course. And
which is hard because everything's political.
Yes, exactly. So what does it mean to, what are the exact ins and outs of that? The interesting thing is that I do think that there's a lot of scenarios where I think it's actually incredibly valuable to teach like a variety of perspectives. I don't take like a extreme like black and white stance on this, but I think the way this gets implemented at a state level is quite dangerous in my opinion, especially when I think that there is a lot of avenues within just an academic institution that can ensure a diversity of perspectives. So that polarity is felt the most obvious here than anywhere I've been.
Yeah, I think especially with that law, it's just that not everything is so black and white.
Yeah.
And specifically with like when we're talking about science, like you aren't going to explain the point of view of people that don't believe in science because you're teaching science. So it's like, how are you supposed to teach both sides to certain subjects?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of it has to do with intentionality, and you speak a lot to that. So I think it's not about convincing someone to believe in a certain way. It's just seeing a new perspective.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just trying to open your eyes. And, you also talk about the illusion of choice. Like, it's hard to know what you fully believe in, There's so, what do we really believe? It's hard to explain. But I feel like our beliefs really do change, and sometimes we say we believe in something we really don't, and we don't really stand for it. So I guess there's a lot of just polarity within that.
And that's the inner polarity that we've been talking about too. I mean, it's easy to sort of accept the societal and everything. One thing, though, I think that's really interesting, Jamie, I'm so glad you are in the state of Indiana right now, because one of the things as we were looking through your work that we were all attracted to was the idea that you will jump into conflict and you can't avoid it. And a lot of people who maybe are in your shoes would say, I want to teach at a different institution that, sees things more eye to eye versus you jumping into that. Is there anything in your background that sort of took you to that space of tension?
I think a lot of it is how strongly I believe in the idea of conflict resolution, and that the fact that like conflict is just inevitable and it's like a part of it's just a part of society. And I feel like I've seen more harm and more detriment done to the idea of avoiding conflict, avoiding even the possibility that you may have been in the wrong, that I think produces like a worse outcome instead of figuring out how to lean into conflict or have an acceptance of conflict in a way that I think is more healthier. Yeah.
And finding common ground is something we've talked a lot about.
Yeah.
How do we do that as the antidote to polarity?
Yeah, or like maybe accepting that there isn't common ground. I think the other thing is interesting about this is like, and of course disagree with me on this as you will, is I think for me there's degrees of how I want to engage in like variety of opinions and perspectives, right? And that's very subjective. For me, and this is not the case for everyone, I'm not willing to find common ground with a neo-Nazi. And I think that I can find ways of like seeing humanity and seeing that like I think a lot of people who may come from that positioning, there's a lot of things that bring them to that place. It's complicated, but like I'm not interested in being on a podcast of neo-Nazis.
Affiliating with that.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that there are lots of other ways that I am interested and am willing to be around like a diversity of kind of ways of moving about the world and enacting things. Yeah. One thing that I think I want to boast about the media school is, and I don't think this kind of goes into kind of a diversity of perspectives, but also kind of diversity of almost methodology and ways of going about studying the world that could also include polarity, is the variety that media school has functioned as a place people are coming at media as a vessel and a theme from a lot of different professions and perspectives, whether it's journalism to like video production to kind of a social science quantitative approach to qualitative. And that isn't to say that I think people haven't had issues with that structure, but it was actually something that I found quite appealing about coming here, is that I was interested in being around a variety of people that were coming to media in a diversity of ways for a diversity of reasons.
Yeah.
You are very involved with your teaching, I would say. It's one of your biggest passions, and we can see kind of like growing up, we were taught traditionally, very research-based, study, memorization. But I just want to hear your thoughts more about like the importance of intersectional learning.
I had an interesting like kind of trajectory growing up in terms of my relationship to education. I did very poorly in middle school. I had a lot of mental health issues in middle school. I was bullied a lot. I just had a lot of issues, and was very much like a troubled kid. I was just very edgy and bratty in ways that I've like in my adulthood I've been like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was such a brat. Like
smoothed out.
Yeah. But I had something that kind of turned around in my sophomore year that was both from like having a positive relationship with a teacher at my high school, an art teacher. I like started to really, really skyrocket and tried doing very well in school, was like involved in as many things as possible. But I still really struggled with education in a lot of ways or school. I'm a horrible test taker. And I actually learned more later in my life that I have a math learning disability, which I wish I knew when I was younger, but I have struggled with ADHD. I'm just really, really bad at test taking. And I think learning that there is just a lot of different ways to learn that aren't just from in that model, I think is what I think I really value, is that there's just a variety of ways of learning that can accommodate people of a variety of styles of learning and different abilities, what they can do.
Yeah. And it's probably a good time to talk about just your sort of teaching statement on student as producer.
Like I did some research and I saw that the way that you teach mainly is more in like a research-based, like let the students try to learn themselves and then come back to you. And have you found that to be something you use a lot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I will admit that teaching statement is a little is a bit older, and I don't think it's updated to my current one that I have. Yeah. I think what I was trying to get about with that teaching statement is the idea of like kind of collective learning, and that like while I'm the one facilitating this and do maybe have like some knowledge that I'm here to like bestow, this is something that I want to learn with you all. And I remember one time I had one of my professors on campus here, I was felt really impressed by a time that like I asked her a question. She was like, you know what? I don't actually know the answer to that question. I was like, that's awesome, because it's not about just like assuming you know everything, right? And that I think thinking about that in a way that feels like it's interrogating a kind of almost hierarchical structure of how a classroom goes is what I think I really value, in a way that students can feel respected for their opinions, even if it's different than mine, right? Or that they might have knowledge that I can learn from.
You spoke a little bit about, as a student, and the challenges with learning the more traditional academia and test taking, but really using multimedia and film as your chosen media for persuasion and for that social activism piece. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting. That's interesting that you bring that up, because I've been thinking about that a lot with myself, and I guess I'll explain why. Is that I've always been very into art, and I think I was very drawn to thinking about is the film as my like art form, and on top of that, very interested in thinking about like my way that I can contribute to social movements and activism is through media production. And I've really run the gamut of what kinds of media. I would say videography has been my primary one, but I've done a lot of graphic design, podcasts, motion graphics, things like that. I've been very just kind of drawn to this idea of creating kind of independent filmmaking, independent media making that like is able to disseminate stories. I will admit that my interest in media making has diminished and changed compared to how it was when I was younger. And I would say that it's because of social media, or corporate social media, because it feels as if to make content that people see, not only is it in a vast pool of massive amounts of media that everyone can make, but you're really determined and dictated by the algorithms of these platforms. So you have to follow these trends and ways of making things just to have something be seen. I think how much I felt like I have participated in making media that just felt so determined by what the platform needed or wanted in terms of how it shaped the actual content that you make has really hardened me, or like kind of made me a bit disillusioned by these things. And I think everyone feels differently about that, right? But I think my desire of this idea of creating independent alternative media, I don't really know what those things mean anymore. Something about the landscape now, I think has really kind of made me sad, or like kind of less interested. But that isn't to say I don't want to be too, curmudgeon or upsetting about this. I wouldn't be in the media school if it wasn't. But I think what drew me to focus more on my research on social media is honestly because of my experience being a media maker. And among other things, how much social media makes me depressed, and I hate the addiction to it. It makes me not feel good about myself, right?
Yeah, we all have that.
Yeah. And my life is a lot better when I'm not on it, to be very frank. But being the shaping of how I was doing media activism, and it really pushed me to really be interested in social media as a topic of research. That is now what my research is mostly focusing on now, or rather than necessarily like film production or like things such as that.
So how do you deal with the polarity of yourself not particularly liking these platforms, but also utilizing them to get your point across?
Yeah. That's like very, very complicated and confusing. And I think I don't think that there's just, again, I don't think it's not a black and white answer, but I think why this is part of the reason I think I've gotten more into more digital justice work and like online privacy and investment in trying to create alternative platforms, and is thinking about how the platform shapes the actual media that we disseminate, and that it's not. And in my desire of doing those things, there's multiple parts of it, which is that I think there's a lot of different ways that if you are interested in this, to interrogate it and to challenge it. And it's not a you should never use it, or I give up, I don't care, I'm okay with my life being determined by Mark Zuckerberg's algorithms. There's a diversity of ways that I think you can challenge that, even if it's just you deciding, you know what, on Mondays I'm going to block my phone from accessing like social media. That's like a tiny way that you're kind of breaking this mold, or just actually like I'm going to just make sure that I post this content to a site other than TikTok, or I'm going to lean into podcasts because podcasts are decentralized and not determined by one platform, which is something podcast has an interesting legacy of that with like RSS feeds. If you're familiar,
Yeah, of course.
So like that positioning, being involved in podcasting can be an avenue of doing that like kind of pushes or changes the monopolization of big tech on how we exchange discourse and mobilize thought and idea. There's also the desire to like try to push challenging how these platforms function. And you know, there's been lots of things happening with that, with, you know, in terms of, this is a little bit separate from necessarily cultural polarity, but like moves that have been happening on a legislative level with breaking up with antitrust laws, like Google's monopolization, to certain ways people have pushed how content moves on certain platforms such as Instagram, and people just acknowledging how vastly pervasive these platforms, corporate platforms, impact your mental health.
Yeah, because they want to induce.
Yeah, and they want
anger and yeah.
So there, a really interesting. I mean, a study that I think is pretty important is that, you know, we don't actually know how these algorithms work per se because they are proprietary. They're closed source. You can't see the code and behind them, but they are based on monetization. They're trying to make money, and how you can keep making money is through what people refer to as an attention economy. They want you to stay on the platform to keep looking. So they're going to find things that grab one's attention. And one of the things that has come up that researchers have shown is that some of the things that grab the most attention are what one researcher calls, like, I think I might be getting this wrong, like outposting animosity, which is that posts that speak poorly and express outrage towards a different group get some of the most likes and viewership. And it's kind of one of the many ways that people have kind of positioned and have seen how corporate social media, such as Meta, fuels and reignites and kind of the hate speech and harassment and just online polarity, online culture wars, is the fact that those are the things that kind of will spark animosity, spark controversy, are the things that you are going to see more than other platforms because it grabs your attention.
And it's sort of, I mean, I think back to journalism, even in the early days, it was, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, in some ways, it's been a universal precept of doing this.
Yeah, it's definitely not, you know, I think the other one is in terms of the history of radio, shock jocks is a great example. I mean, the history of reality TV is so much based on being outlandish, Jerry Springer show, for instance. I do think that there is something unprecedented. There's something that is important to see, this lineage of like attention economy, or like the importance of grabbing attention. But I do think that there is something relatively unprecedented about social media that I think that fuels a way larger amount of
scale and speed.
Yes. Yeah.
I found it really interesting about your take on cancel culture. I know you mentioned that earlier. How would you describe the benefit of cancel culture in your eyes, and maybe some of the cons of it as well? Because some people get canceled for no reason and some people get canceled for great reasons.
Yeah, like I would say that I'm relatively happy that I know about Jeffrey Epstein or like Harvey Weinstein, right? To a certain degree, I'm almost unfamiliar and I'm curious when people hear the phrase cancel culture, what are they thinking? What's that conception in their mind? Because that's now become a relatively broad thing. That's become a very political talking point that, you know, it kind of goes along with like the social justice warrior, snowflake type of mentality, which again, I think even in those ideas, there's a lot of people have different images of what they're thinking about. The images that I have of kind of online toxicity in terms of how we get upset about harassment is perhaps different than what you all have experienced, right? I think I have an interesting experience that I've been called out and I've called other people out. This is things that happened when I was a lot younger. I think that really changed things for me. The times where I think, a means of a call out for me is like the severity of it and how resistant they have been to anyone talking to them to see how they can make amends or be better. That I think would be part of my my values with that. But I think when I'm thinking about I don't know if I would say I think call out culture is good, but I think that I have criticisms of the ways that a discourse has been formulated around that I do think flattens the nuances of these things.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost just like the phrase itself, cancel culture, versus just holding somebody accountable.
Yeah.
But that's not as provocative.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the main thing I really care about is just realizing that none of us are above causing harm and hurting people and messing up.
And so what kind of questions do you think that we need to ask ourselves? Because it kind of deals with this idea of inner polarity and what is right and what is wrong and what's the gray area within ourselves. So what kind of questions and what kind of realization do you think we need to come to kind of figure out what we think is right and wrong?
I mean, I think I really care about people trying to define that. And it's just, I mean, this gets into philosophical things if there's like objective right and wrong. So I can't touch that. But like, I hope that people develop that for themselves. But I think what I hope is that people are always thinking about learning from others and interrogating themselves, and that knowing that even in their positions of what's considered right and wrong, there is a lot of nuance. And I think I care a lot about a humility and like challenging self-righteousness and just, I think I care about that a lot. And I'm saying that as someone with pretty strong political convictions. It's not necessarily that I don't think I'm willing or like I'm trying to not withhold my beliefs on certain topics that I care a lot about, but rather how I kind of treat people in the day-to-day. I think the way that I'm most interested in polarity, or how I think I've interrogated it, is the intersection between media technologies and polarity, with like one of witnessing these broader scale online culture wars. And that I think allows me to lurk a bit. There's a topic that's a phrase that gets used in like online ethnography, is this idea of lurking. And I think it allows me to do that, but I think the polarity is that I think I witness even within my own little networks of my more like political networks I've been in, subcultural networks, is a level of self-righteousness or conflict avoidance that's like, it's not even about politics. Like, it's just like, or it is, but it's not like about like we're disagreeing on like the president. Like, there's arguments on smaller things, right?
Yeah.
And that I think it's like almost those more mundane types of things, in the ways that like people, judge the judgmentalness or unwillingness to kind of just hear that you've hurt someone, or like just things like that. I think it's almost that I've been influenced the most by like the micro incidents of it that are not necessarily as political, and then the macro compared to the middle ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We have so many inherent biases
Yeah.
and things like, I think it's
That
kind of out of our
confirmation bias.
control sometimes.
Yeah.
How we.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think acknowledging that is really good.
Yeah.
Theme that I think maybe this challenges this podcast a little bit. I think that there's a way that you can wield the like, we have to hear both sides and like everyone has to get along, is like, can get used in a way that I think is
Harmful.
is problematic and hurtful. The polarity thing is I think that's part of why I find it very interesting. Is it's not leaning too much into how we have to hear everyone's sides is tricky,
And I think one of the lines these guys wrote in the manifesto is, we have to all recognize that we are polarized.
Yes.
And I think that it begins with self-awareness. Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting place to sort of wrap up, is just the idea. I feel like this conversation has made me realize, I think you bring a very interesting perspective to polarity, that the answer is not to see all sides. The answer is to be open to having your mind changed.
Yeah.
To be open to zooming out, to be open to like empathy and self-awareness, but that it all is such an individual, subjective moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that it gets really confusing. Yeah.
And to lean away from herd mentality and going off of what you think is cool.
I just want less jerks in the world.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good goal. And I think also just starting small, you know, and I think the idea of not giving away your power, you know, not letting when somebody does something that offends you or hurts you to give them the satisfaction of being offended by it. Yeah. But then advocating for yourself. So it's a very, very complicated subject, but I think you brought a lot of really interesting perspectives. Thank you for sharing your own personal experiences too. I think that is, especially for, you know, one of the things we talked about with Polarity is what's your generation's viewpoint of it, which is really what I'm trying to do is facilitate a season that lets you explore the different dimensions and the different ways of
It is
dealing.
interesting to think about how different generations understand polarity in different ways. That's like
100%.
actually like super fascinating.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. This episode was created and produced at the IU Media School as part of the Beautiful Thinkers podcast, IU Edition. To follow along this season, check out the Beautiful Thinkers Project on Instagram and LinkedIn. Special thanks to Bella Grimaldi for our music and the students who researched and recorded this episode, Hannah Whipple, Selena Ayub, and Natalie Millar.